For years, if you wanted to play real PC games, you were locked into a very specific box. You needed an Intel or AMD processor. Windows was the gatekeeper. Then, Valve released the Steam Deck and proved that Linux was ready for the big leagues. But yesterday, Valve did something even more game-changing. They didn't just update Proton, they released the first official ARM64 build. They have officially unlocked the most played library in the world for a completely different architecture. We are talking about SteamOS on standalone VR headsets like the Steam Frame and a new generation of ultra-efficient handhelds. Today we're diving into the Proton 11 beta. We'll examine the NTSync change that's delivering a 600% performance boost to some games, the implementation of FEX-Emu, and why this is a clear signal that Valve's next hardware is right around the corner. Before we get to the ARM magic, we have to talk about the core change. Proton 11 is a massive rebase onto Wine 11. The star of the show here is something called NTSync. If you've been following Linux gaming for a while, you've heard of eSync and FSync. These were workarounds used to translate how Windows games talk to the CPU. In Windows, games use NT synchronization primitives. Linux didn't have a native way to understand these, so Proton had to translate them on the fly, which created a massive performance bottleneck. With Wine 11 and Proton 11, we finally have NTSync. This is a native implementation inside the Linux kernel, specifically kernel 6.14 and later. Let's just look at the numbers from some early developer benchmarks, because they are pretty absurd. Dirt 3 went from 110 FPS to 860. That is a 678% improvement. Resident Evil 2 jumped from 26 FPS, pretty much barely playable, to 77 FPS. Tiny Tina's Wonderland saw gains from 130 FPS up to 360. Now, to be clear, it's not like you're going to see a 600% jump in something like Cyberpunk 2077 on your Steam Deck today. Those massive leaps are happening in games where the CPU was the bottleneck. But for every gamer, this means lower latency, fewer micro stutters, and much better frame time consistency. Valve developers have often talked about removing the friction between the player and the game, and NTSync does that exactly. Beyond the speed, we have massive compatibility wins. Games that were previously stuck in experimental or just flat out broken are now officially supported. We're talking about classics like the original Resident Evil, Dino Crisis, and Shogun Total War. Valve is making sure that the entire history of PC gaming, not just the new games, travels with us into this new era. So now let's go into why this update is actually a really big deal, and that comes down to Proton 11 ARM64. This is the secret sauce. The problem with ARM chips, the kind that are in your phone or even the Meta Quest, is that they use a completely different instruction set architecture than the x86 64 processors in your PC. To fix this, Valve has been quietly sponsoring a project called FEX-Emu, which we have covered before on the channel, but if you are unaware, FEX is a high-performance user space emulator that translates x86 instructions into ARM instructions in real time. With Proton 11, Valve has officially baked FEX-2604 directly into the compatibility layer for the first official time. The latest 2604 update focuses on two things: memory savings and x87 transcendental optimizations. Many ARM handhelds like the Odin 2 or Retroid Pocket are limited to 8GB or 12GB of RAM. FEX-2604 introduces major memory usage optimizations that allow x86 games to run without hitting that out-of-memory wall. For games like Fallout New Vegas, which rely heavily on older x87 math instructions, FEX offers up to a 3.7x improvement in specific operations. This is essentially Valve's Rosetta 2. When Apple switched to their own M1 chips, they had Rosetta to make sure your old apps still worked. Valve essentially just did that before the entire Steam library. The barrier for different hardware is now completely gone. This isn't just about about Valve, it's about a broader shift in the industry. Microsoft is heavily pushing Windows on ARM with Snapdragon X Elite and X Plus laptops, complete with their own x86 translation layer called Prism. But now Valve has introduced an alternative with the new Proton 11 ARM64 build. What gives Valve a unique long-term edge in this situation is their full control over their stack. SteamOS, the Proton compatibility layer, and the FEX translation layer. This tight integration allows gaming-specific optimizations that are much harder for a general-purpose operating system like Windows. If installing SteamOS on a Snapdragon device delivers better gaming performance, battery life, or simplicity than Windows 11 for many titles, gamers will have a very clear choice. Valve is quietly making Windows optional for the next wave of efficient mobile and portable gaming devices. And Valve's reasoning comes down to the Steam frame and future hardware like the Steam Deck 2. You cannot put an x86 processor like the one in the Steam Deck into a comfortable VR headset. It's too hot, it's too heavy, and the battery wouldn't last that long. ARM is the only way forward for wearable and handheld tech. In an interview with Japanese media, some Valve employees said, "If we can own our own hardware and pursue a better gaming experience, we can offer high value without waiting for third-party companies to respond." So by building Proton ARM, Valve is no longer waiting for AMD or Intel to make a low-power chip that works for VR. They can now use the world-class mobile silicon from Qualcomm or even other custom ARM designs. So this is the hardware roadmap, and Proton 11 is now the software foundation that makes that hardware possible. While we are waiting for the Steam frame to actually check this all out ourselves, the community is already losing its mind. If you own an ARM-based handheld like the Odin 2 or the Retro Pocket, your device just got a massive upgrade. The developers of Rocknix have already integrated official Steam support. And then there's also the Nintendo Switch. Because the Switch runs on an NVIDIA Tegra ARM chip, gamers have already managed to get Proton 11 running on modded Switches just hours after it was released. Now, before you go out and buy an ARM device, we need to talk about the catches. Proton 11 is currently in the beta branch. That means bugs and other potential issues. This is for the early adopters and the tinkerers who understand it's not fully ready yet. But just like every other version of Proton, there will be continuous updates to constantly improve the software. So it will really only get better from here. Then there is also the problem of anti-cheats. Even though Proton can translate the game and Valve has worked with anti-cheat providers to get them running, it still can't always translate kernel level anti-cheat software like Ricochet or Vanguard. However, for 90% of single player games and many titles, the future is looking bright. So this is why Proton 11 is actually a very big deal. We are watching Valve dismantle the final barrier to PC gaming. For decades, PC gaming meant being tied to a desk or carrying a heavy hot laptop. The Steam Deck changed that, but it was still tied to the old x86 architecture. Proton 11 ARM is Valve saying Steam is an ecosystem, not just a platform. Valve has now lit the fuse for the future of gaming hardware. Would you want a more battery efficient and lighter Steam Deck 2? If you are interested in the future of gaming and any Valve news, don't forget to subscribe.